Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got it right here in front of me.
Okay. So let me pull it up.
And I also have the condensed, the individual orientation assessment.
Yes, which is kind of the poor man's MBTI.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Perfect for us.
um, so you can see the presentation purposes. Um, no, nothing to say a whole lot about that. Um, I usually spend a little bit of time talking about what is that. I don't have slight numbers on these. The what is the MBTI? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I place an emphasis around the word preference. It measures psychological type preference. It doesn't measure psychoses and neuroses or anything like that, because the moment that you start um, giving people assessments, they oftentimes get nervous for fear that whatever their inner issues are will become public knowledge. And
Right.
I usually jokingly say, "Your craziness is safe with me." And it is the most widely used personality assessment. It's aligned with Carl Jung's psychological type. You'll learn a lot of this in your certification. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's been in active use since the 1920s, more than 5 million served. It's available in at least 31 languages. I've probably facilitated it in 7 languages. So it's used throughout the world. So a little bit of time on that. What is preference? Oh, I'm trying to think. From a process standpoint, Melissa, I need to remember that folks will not have completed this when you start this presentation.
Well, they could. So we'll be sending them some pre-work, and that was one of the things I'm glad to talk to you about, get your perspective. So we'll be sending them sort of an ebook of some background information on the program itself, and then by that I mean the management development program. So
Right.
An ebook that covers the first 2 days, so it's 2-day class.
Okay.
Whatever they need to have in advance, as well as their workbook.
Okay.
And so this could be this individual assessment could be a part of their workbook that they do, and they do it in advance.
Right. I'm looking at this, and for some reason, did your printout come out okay? Because I'm looking at this, and mine doesn't have any pages. It's not paginated or anything like that. If you send something out, I'm sorry. Go ahead and answer.
No, well, I mean, it came out okay. I don't have any notes or anything, but
That's fine. I'm just looking at the format. The format was all jacked up. I'm reading it on my iPad though, so that may be the problem. So if you were to send anything out to them, I would say uh, send out the part that has the instructions, which is the first page, as well as the questions. Don't send them anything past question 40B. So when it gets into the scoring sheet, don't give them that.
Okay.
So just send them what precedes that. And then they will actually score that as a part of it, because you want this to be a bit of a discovery process for them.
Okay.
Okay? And that'll save you some time, because they can complete that. You're going to have some people who will come in who won't have it done. So since you'll be doing this after lunch, you might want to remind them that if they didn't have that completed, they can complete that during lunch and come in after lunch ready to go.
So would you recommend that we do this on day 1?
No.
No, okay, so this will be the morning of day 2 then, and then after that will be, in the afternoon will be the simulation. No, I'm sorry, forget it. Yep. We already discussed that. Simulation is first. Thank you, Ollie, for being more on top of it than me. My goodness.
That's okay.
Too many things in my head. Okay, thank you.
I gotcha.
Thank you.
If I were you in the instruction, you may want to highlight for your ebook that last paragraph, which gets has to do with the scoring, which basically says, your A and B must total 5. You have 5 points divided among A and B. Don't use fractions. Because you have some, knuckleheads who want to do fractions, and it makes for a mess when it comes down to the scoring. So if they come in having done that, that's a beautiful thing. So, assuming they've done that, let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
So, right now we should be on the third slide, which is what is preference, or fourth slide, what is preference?
Yes. Yes.
Now, the way I do this is very simple. I ask people to pull out a piece of paper, and I say to them, it can be the back of a sheet. It really needs to be a full-size piece of paper. Simple task, and then we'll take it from there. So, and the simple task is, I'm going to say to them, for the next 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to sign your name as many times as you can in 1 minute. And people are going to look at me, they'll look at you rather strangely, but you'll need a stopwatch, or use your phone with a second hand, or use a second hand in the room. And I will say to people, write your name as many times as you can in 1 minute. Everybody understand the task. And I'll say something like, pretend like you're buying a house, or pretend like you're paying your monthly bills. And people will say, can I use my initials? Do I have to write my full name? And I'll just say, I want your signature, however you sign your name. So I don't want to get hung up on the mechanics of that, because that's really not the point. But I will tell them, use your full signature. If you sign, J.A. Jones, then sign J.A. Jones, and not John Anthony or Janice Ann or whatever your name is. Just giving the full signature. So as many times as you can, and I'll say, is the task clear? And they'll say yes. And then they'll start. And what I usually do is I keep them in tune with the timing by saying 15 seconds have elapsed. You have 45 seconds remaining. 30 seconds have elapsed. You have 30 seconds remaining. 45 seconds have elapsed. You have 15 seconds remaining. And then when it gets down to 5 seconds, I'll count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. And then I will say to them, count the full number of signatures you have produced. So full signatures only, so don't give me any halves. So, and then I will write on a flip chart how many had 50 or more. And they'll go, oh, no, nobody had 50 or more. And sometimes there are people who write incredibly fast and whose scribbling is indecipherable, and they can do 50 or 60. And then I'll count down from there, 50. Anybody do 45 or more? And whatever number they give me, I put that on the chart. And I write them in single file. So I would write a column that might have 60 at the top, followed by 57, followed by 42. All the while I'm asking the group, anybody get 40 or more? How many did you get? I got 42. Okay, I'll write 42. Anybody else? And then I'll say, anybody get 35 or more? Oh, I got 36. Well, I got 37. I'll write them down in reverse numerical order. So I'll start with the highest and go down to the lowest.
Okay.
And is that making sense? So I'll do that.
It does. And when you get down one whole length of the flip chart, do you just move it over and start another single file line sort of down the middle of the flip chart on the right side?
Yes. Yes. Yes, if I have that many people. And then I'll say, is everybody included? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, great. All right, now we're going to do that same task, but with a slight variation. So instead of using your preferred hand, the hand that you normally sign with, I want you to take your pen or pencil and put it in your other hand. the task will be the same. Write your name as many times as you can in 1 minute. Once again, I'll keep track of time for you. Ready to begin? Ready to begin, and you'll hear a lot of moaning and, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I don't even know how to make letters with my other hand. So,
Right.
so they'll do that, and once again, I'll say, begin. 45 seconds, 15 seconds have elapsed, 45 seconds remain, 30 seconds have elapsed, 30 seconds remain, on and on and on, until I get down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop, count the number of completed signatures you have. And then I go back to the original chart, the original list, and I said, somebody had 57 first time, who was that? And then I will say, how many did you do this time? This time I got 12, okay? And then I would go on down the list until everybody's scores are reflected. Their original scores and their second scores.
Okay.
And then I will say to them, now describe for me what the experience was like when you did this the first time. Now, one of the things that I like to do, I should have mentioned this before, I apologize. When I write down their first scores, I'll write it down in one color. And when I write down their second scores, I'll write that down in a different color.
Okay.
So I may even refer to it. So when you were writing down and what I captured in the blue marker, how would you describe that experience? And I'll get a lot of words like, oh, it was easy, it was automatic, I didn't think about it, it was fun, it was fast, a lot of words like that. And I like to capture those adjectives.
Okay.
And then I will say, okay, now let me ask you about when I asked you to do this the second time, where you were using your non-preferred hand, and I would use that language because of the tie-in to the MBTI. We talk about preference and non-preference. Mm-hmm. So I would say, when you were using your non-preferred hand, what was that like? And they would say, oh, it was impossible, it was ugly, and blah, 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 blah. One of the things that I like to listen for, and if I don't hear it, I will ask, and that is the word energy, variations on the word energy. So on the first iteration, they'll say, oh, it was fast, it was quick, it didn't require any thinking. And I might even use that as a way of priming them when we're looking at the words to describe the second experience. They'll say it was slow, it just took so much time, it took a lot of effort, I had to really think about what I was doing. Now, once they finish all that, I will say, you've just seen what preference is and what non-preference is. When you and I act according to preference, we act in a way that's easy, that's fast. I use their language. Whatever they put up there. It was easy, it was fast, it was automatic, I didn't have to think about it. All of those are examples of what we mean by operating from preference, whether it's preference related to writing or whether it's preference related to your personality. So if we're talking about preference as it relates to personality, I would imagine that you would agree that if we can find out where your sweet spot is preference-wise, that makes life easy, fun, exciting, automatic, blah, 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 for you, then that would be a much better way for you to live than if you were operating from a place of doing those things that took extra time, you didn't feel very good about your performance, it didn't look like your best work, and other language that I would borrow from the way they describe the second experience. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does.
And I would use that to say what the Myers-Briggs does is it helps you find that place in your personality that is your preference. So that when you work, when you interact with others, you might operate most effectively from that place of preference rather than trying to operate from a place where you're simply doing it out of obligation. So if you could find a way in which you could operate more in keeping with your preference, do you think it would make your life easier? And usually they go, oh, absolutely. And then I say, okay, let's dig in and explore this further. This next slide, before we dig in, I would eliminate that slide.
Okay. The preference pairs?
No.
Before we dig in.
Before we dig in, I would eliminate that slide. Only because when I used this before, I was dealing with a group of people that I didn't know what they did. And so this slide I included as a way for me to get grounded in the type of work that they did so that when I talked through the pairs, I could underscore things that they might do in their daily work that tied into the preference pairs as we describe them.
Okay.
Now, when we go into the preference pairs, I will talk them through and say, the Myers-Briggs looks at 4 paired sets of behaviors. You can think of these as operating on a scale from extremely to the left to extremely to the right. So in looking at extroversion and introversion, the first pair, one can be extremely extroverted all the way to the left. One can be extremely introverted all the way to the right, or one might be somewhere along the continuum between the two. And the same thing is true for each one of the other preference pairs. I will explain those preference pairs and give you an opportunity to experience them to some degree as we go forward. And then we dive in. The next slide talks about type watching. This is one of the things I like to do. I may have to retract what I just said about using this tool, because one of the things that I do in type watching let me look at the other. I've decided I don't like this one as well. One of the things that I like folks to do is do type watching. Well, let me see here. I have so many versions of these. I want to make sure I do. No. I like to ask them to do what I call type watching. So, and what it is an attempt to get them to think about not only their own personality types as we go through the various explanations. I don't include that in here. Well, let me just tell you what I would add to the slides that I've sent you. I would add a slide that's on type watching. I would say to them, pick somebody in the room that you know reasonably well. And as I go through the various explanations of the personality type dimensions, I want you to think which end of the scale this person seems in your mind to fit. So when I look at extroversion and introversion, and I describe the characteristics of extroverts versus introverts, I like for you to think about, where do you believe this person fits better? Are they more on the extroverted end of the scale, or are they more on the introverted end of the scale? So the intent of this for you, Melissa, is really to get them not only thinking about themselves, but observing other people. Because one of the places we want them to get them to is to be able to size people, to read people, and to adjust their actions and interactions based on their perception of the individual's personality type. So if I see someone and I sense them to be more introverted than I am extroverted, I may give them more time for thought and reflection, not barrage them with so many questions at once, because extroverts tend to barrage people with questions more than once, and introverts tend to like to have time for thought and reflection. So that might be just one example of how I might adjust my style based on that. I wouldn't tell them that at this point. I would save that for later. At this point, I just want them to think about, identify someone in the room, and you're going to use the same person to think about for every description, and then at the end we will check and see how accurate your perceptions were.
Okay.
So that's the way I normally use type watching. So I don't know what possessed me to put that slide in there, because I never do type watching that way.
I'll tweak it.
Okay.
Which, actually, while I'm thinking of it, how do you feel about us putting these slides into our branded template? Can I credit you on the bottom and still put it in our own?
Sure.
Comfortable for you?
That'd be perfectly fine.
And for the same thing for the assessment.
Yes.
Can I put it in the workbook? It's going to, and then what? Credit you?
Used by permission. Yeah, used by permission.
Used by permission. By okay, great.
Yep. Now, since you're going through your certification next week, I don't know that I need to walk through each one of these. What I would encourage you to do as you go through your certification is develop a set of descriptors that work for you. Now, I start, and the reason I start with sensing and intuiting, which is in the middle. You will learn about the functions and the attitudes when you go through your certification. And the functions, Myers-Briggs wise, are sensing and intuiting, thinking and feeling. It's the two sets of inner paired characteristics. I start there. So I don't start my explanation with extroversion and introversion. So I start with the inner functions. Then I go to the attitudes, and that's where I get into judging, perceiving, and extroversion, introversion. So I started in the inside, and that's the reason, because they really belong together that way.
Okay.
And so, and I have my own descriptions. You'll find yours. And so what you may want to do while you go through your certification is keep this handy and just jot down some thoughts in terms of the way that you could, stick that in there. How would you describe sensing and intuiting versus thinking or feeling? One of the things that I do emphasize, though, is in that bullet that you see on the sensing and intuiting slide, which is on every one of the slides. Everyone does this to some degree. So even if you're the strongest intuitor there is, you probably do some sensing, because you have to keep a checkbook. And sensing is a very detailed skill and competency that even the most intuitive among us have to do at some point. You may not do it well, and that's where we get into the difference between preference and non-preference. But you know how to do it. You know how to, keep a list. You may not keep lists as a matter of practice, but you know how, because our educational system and you'll learn a lot of this when you go through your certification. Our educational system is built around sensing. Students sit in a row. We call roll in a classroom, usually starting with the A's and ending in a Z. It's a very ordered, systematic, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 process.
Mm-hmm.
Versus intuiting that tends to be much more global and spatial in their thinking. So as you kind of pay attention to that through your certification, you'll find language and you'll hear examples there that will work for you. So what we may want to do after you've done your certification is have another conversation where you start thinking about, this is how I would present it, and I could certainly offer you some thoughts on that.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Okay.
And Steve said in one of his earlier emails that we're piloting this next week. We're piloting the Welcome to Goodwill New Hire orientation. I think he got confused.
Okay.
So we're piloting this January 19th.
Oh, okay.
So maybe that first week of January I could.
Sure.
Or even before, well, probably not before that because I'm gone to the 19th, and then I'll want to come back and do a little work on it so I can share with you.
Okay.
Maybe that first week of January, if you have any time later
Yeah,
in the week
I
or
should.
whenever you come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have that much vacation.
Are you taking?
I'm not going anywhere.
Are you taking? Okay.
No time off. If I take anything off, it may be a half day here or there, because neither Patricia nor I have much time, because she had about 4 weeks when we got here, and she took that time as her transition time. So we'll probably do Christmas Day and that's it, and we're not going anywhere.
Okay.
So that'll be
Okay.
that. Yeah, so we'll be around. Christmas and New Year's Day.
Okay.
We'll have that off, but other than that, we'll be around.
We'll be around it. Okay. Are there? Well, let's go back to this and then. But yes, that might make sense. Then I can share with you what I would put there and get your perspective.
Sure. Now, one of the things at the end of every one of these explanations, so the slide that has, which all of them do, common descriptors, personal genius, personal pitfalls, well-known personality types, and prevalence. Prevalence relates to what percentage of the population is sensing versus intuiting. Now, they may give you different statistics. I haven't heard the latest, so I usually use data that I will admit is a few years old. But you may want to listen for that as you're going through your certification as well, because a lot of people get really interested in terms of how unusual am I. In terms of well-known personality types, I'll send you the sheet that I have. It's a chart that'll show you kind of the 16 personality types and who fits in those. I have several of those. They're just good gee whiz information for people to have.
And for what is this for? What I'm trying to follow you. I'm sorry.
Okay, so on the page or the PowerPoint slide that says sensing or intuiting.
Yes.
There on the left side of that chart, it says well-known personality types. Do you see that?
I don't see that. I have on the left side. I have common descriptors, personal genius, personal pitfall, best fits in careers and in life, and prevalent.
Oh.
Maybe I'm looking at a different.
Which presentation are you looking at?
I'm looking at inner smarts, outer
Okay. Yeah.
excellence, but I
Okay.
do see in this other one the well-known personality types.
Yep.
So I could just change that section instead of saying, I think it's just careers.
Right.
Best fits in careers and life. Maybe
Right.
I'll change that to well-known personality types.
Yeah, whichever one you like best.
Okay.
I've used both. I think I changed it to careers because I was doing. I often have people when I use the one whose real interest is, am I in the right place?
Right.
Career-wise. So I will use that descriptor there. But either one of them work.
Okay. We'll do the well-known personality types.
And I will send you a chart of the 16 personality types. And and it will give you names of people who fit in those personality types.
Okay,
So
excellent. Thank you.
you'll see other ENTPs, ISTJs, ISFJs, all of those people. They'll be on there.
Okay.
And so you can just, pull some names out of there.
All right.
Let's see. Okay, so you do that for all 4 of them. I like to give them a rich array. I think one of the biggest challenges in explaining this is differentiating sensing and intuiting from thinking and feeling, that people oftentimes get those confused. And the way that I like to explain those is there are 2 different ways of taking in information. So when I take in information using sensing, I'm using details, specifics. For instance, imagine a police woman or policeman interviewing someone who's just been assaulted. Describe the assailant. Well, he was about 5'10", about 225 pounds. He had a scar over his left eye. The way that I'm using that description is very detail-oriented. It would be highly sensing. If the person answered, well, he was a very scary man, he had a very intimidating presence, and he was very gruff, everything about him was gruff, well, that too is a descriptor. It's not as useful a descriptor because it's hard for me to know what gruff looks like, and it's hard for me to go after someone who simply looks gruff. But it still is a descriptor. Both are descriptors, but they use different skills. One uses details, one uses a more global approach. So it's just 2 different ways of doing the same thing. I oftentimes will use the example of buying a home. So my wife and I are going to go out and buy a home. If my wife is highly sensing, she's probably going to emphasize it needs to have 4 bedrooms. There need to be at least 3.5 baths. The living room needs to be at least 15 by 13 in order to accommodate the piano that we have. And there may be other very, very detailed responses that will help me make a decision. And on the basis of that, I will know whether or not this is a good house for me to look at. If I'm highly intuitive, on the other hand, I may say it needs to be in a good neighborhood. It needs to be, a place that I'll look forward to coming home in the evening. There are all kinds of descriptors I can use, which are very non-specific, but they are also descriptors. So we can see through that the difference between sensing and intuitives. Intuitives are much more global, big picture, and there are other languages, other ways of describing them that you'll pick up as you go through the certification.
Okay.
And but when I finish that description, and I usually ask them, do you have a sense of which end of the scale you're on? And do you have a sense of which end of the scale the person that you're tracking is on? Because I'd ask them in the beginning to follow somebody through each of the descriptions. So where are you and where is the person you're following? There's a handout that I oftentimes will give them that will give them pretty much what you see in the PowerPoint slides, but will also give them 2 continua at the bottom of the page where they can track themselves. Where are you along this continuum from thinking or sensing and intuiting, very sensing to very intuiting, and where is the other person you're following? So I'll ask them to put an X, to represent where they are, and put a 0 or an O to represent where the person they're following is. And then we'll go to the next description. Okay. We'll do that for all 4 of them, ending with extroversion and introversion. And then I'll ask...
Do you have that you could send to me, or is that something I could just create?
I think I have it. It's finding it is the big deal. But I think I have it. In fact,
maybe I'll get something similar.
You might. I have an 18-page handout that I have given out in the past that I'll send to you that has all kinds of goodies in it.
Okay.
All of the slides that you see here, as well as the other deals, I think I have them on my computer at home.
Okay.
So I'll look for those,
Awesome.
and I will send
Thank
those to
you.
you. It's really, I think it's very helpful. And I've kind of stolen from the finest. So
Awesome.
there's a lot of just good background information there.
Okay.
So after you would have done the explanation, you're now going to have them go back to the handout and score theirs.
Okay.
So they're going to go back to that handout that I sent where you had them stop after they finished question 40. And they're now going to transfer their scores to the scoring sheets, total their results, and that will determine their 4-letter type. Oops. Before that, though, I would ask them to take a look at how they scored themselves and how they scored the person that they're following. So use going back and looking at where you put your X for yourself and your O for them. What what's the collection of X's and O's tell you?
And Ollie, this is just them tracking somebody in their mind, not sharing it out in the open, right?
It's them tracking someone in the room that they know reasonably well.
Right, but they're not sharing.
No.
I'm tracking Ollie, and I think Ollie is a... Okay.
Nope, not at all.
Okay.
Because they could be 100% wrong. So the goal is really for them to just practice that skill, and then at the end, once everybody's scored theirs, to allow a few moments for them to compare notes with the person they've tracked to see if they were accurate or not.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Now the review your results slide, that'll have to be different because this presentation was done for people for whom we had them do their assessments online, and then I printed a handout for them. So each one of them, so you'll have to change this slide.
Okay.
And to the instructions, basically, add your scores together, look at the sheet, determine, what your 4-letter type is, read the description, because I think in the handout materials, there are brief descriptions for the 4-letter types, and determine a goodness of fit. And then the next, you have a handout there that says the MBTI type table. Do you see that? It should be a couple of slides later.
Yes, I see it.
So what you're going to do here is you're going to ask each person on the basis of his or her results you're going to reproduce this chart on a flip chart.
Okay.
And, if you want, you can just have this pre-printed and laminated.
Okay.
And ask each person to go up there and with a dry erase pen or marker, write their name in the box that corresponds to their type.
Okay.
And then after everybody has done that, you'll ask them to take a look at where the preponderance of people are. And there's a way to read the Myers-Briggs type table. You'll learn this in your training. But if you look at the top 2 rows, the top 2 rows are all introverts. The bottom 2 rows are all extroverts.
Okay.
So I'll ask them, count the number of introverts, count the number of extroverts. And I'll write on the side of the flip chart, E equals, and I'll have a blank, and then I equals blank. In fact, if I were going to have a pre-printed chart, I would have that on there so that when you start tallying, you can see how many people in the room are extroverts versus introverts. And then you can just note, I see that there are 7 introverts in the room and 4 extroverts. So what would you
Okay.
say about that? And they'd say, well, we're more introverted than we are extroverted. Okay? Just noting it, not making any judgments about it. And then when you go to the S's and the N's, the 2 columns on the left are the sensing types, and the 2 columns on the right are the intuitive types. And what I usually do is I'll go to the chart and I'll just point with my fingers so they can see where those are. So you see the ISTJ column, and it's got ISTJ, ISTP, ESTP, ESTJ, then ISFJ, etc. And then the next 2 are the 2 intuitives. And then I'll say, okay, so how many sensing do you see? How many intuitives do you see? And then when it comes to T and F, the T's are typically on the far left column and the far right column. And the F's are in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So how many T's, how many F's? And then finally J's and P's. The J's are on the top row and the bottom row, and the P's are in the 2 middle rows. So we're going to count them. Once again, how many?
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
And then what that allows you to do is find what's known as the modal type. That is the most frequently occurring type. And the modal type is simply, if I look at E's and I's and there's more I's than E's, then the modal type would be I. And then if I look at S's and N's, and if there are more S's than N's, it would be the modal type would be an S. And then I look at T's and F's, and if there are more T's than F's, there would be a T and J. So, and I do the same thing for J. Whichever is the greater determines the modal type. So as I look at the group overall, using the example I just gave you in this conversation, I might say the modal type of this group is an ISTJ. So if I'm working with this group, or if I've determined that this is the kind of group I'm going into, then that means that I may have to flex my style, especially if I'm not an ISTJ. I'm going to have to allow for more time for thought and reflection. I'm going to have to be more detail-oriented. I'm going to have to be more objective and fact-based in my conclusions. And if it's J, I'm going to have to be more definitive with recommendations than I would if I were a P. And all of this is going to come out of my previous conversations I've had with them on the descriptions of the 4 paired opposites.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, yep. I'm so glad I'm going to the class, too.
Yeah, it'll make a difference. And you can, if you look at the next slide, this is fascinating for a couple of reasons, because it basically shows you where these groups land in the population. So what percentage of the population is ISTJ versus ENFP versus INTJ and ESTP? And you can also see males versus females. So in some instances, for instance, if you look at INTJs, you'll see it's 0.5% of the population is female.
Oh, okay. I wondered what that was. Wow. Okay.
So, and you can see that there's a range in some of them. Some of them it's between 4.5% and 5.5% male under ENTJ, whereas it's 2.5% female. So you can see how these operate. Now, going into the next slide, there is a theory associated with the Myers-Briggs called the theory of dominance. And the notion, dominance with a TS, not a CE. And the dominant is when I'm in a situation that requires action, which of the four inner functions, that is, sensing, intuiting, thinking, or feeling, am I likely to use first? So if you look at, let's pick on ENFP, because you're really an ENFP. You'll notice that your first function is an N. So, and you can see that on this chart. So when you're in a situation that requires problem solving, you're likely to begin by using your creativity, which is what intuitives do really well. As an INFP, notice just one above, the first function for an INFP is feeling. This is the dialogue between Patricia and me. Because even though we're alike in three of the four functions, when we begin problem solving, she begins talking about what she likes, and I begin talking about the possibilities.
Ah.
So, if you look at...
So,
go ahead.
Okay, let me just ask. So, if you're problem solving, and she's talking about what she likes, whether it's possible or not, help me understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, what she likes. So, let's say... let me give you a recent example out of our table conversation. So, is your mother coming for Christmas? Her response is, I don't know if I want my mother to come for Christmas. So,
right.
And so I will say, well, if we plan ahead, we might be able to get a good price on a flight. Again, now what you hear is my intuition kicking in. Here are the possibilities. So if we start early, or we could fly her to Kansas City, and she could fly down with your daughter, because we know that Patricia's daughter's coming. And Patricia's still I don't know if I want her to come for Christmas. I don't know if my daughter will want to spend time with her, because my daughter spent Thanksgiving with her, and it about drove her nuts. So the first foot that you see her exercising is one of like or dislike. Is this pleasing to me or is it not? My first response is, well, here are the possibilities. Now, I may not want her to come particularly much myself, but I'm kind of feeling like we at least should examine the possibilities around whether or not it's feasible for her to come. If the tickets are $800 a piece, she's probably not going to come this year. If it's a more reasonable price, we might consider it. But she really is at the place of, and part of the reason we haven't made a decision yet, even though the clock's ticking away, is she's still saying, I don't know if I want my mother to be around that long.
Right.
So it is from a sense of dominance. It shows up, I think, really well when I get a group of people together to problem solve. Imagine if I get a group of people together and we're going to problem solve, and there are all of these different first steps, or the first foot forward. Let me give you an example. For instance, if I have an ESTJ, their first foot forward is going to be what?
Thinking.
Right. So they're
logical.
Yeah, logical, fact-based.
Just the facts, man.
Just the facts. Now, if I got that person in a room with an ESFJ, their first foot forward is going to be what?
Right, how they feel about it.
Right. How do we communicate? So you can see I have an inherent conflict. With only one letter difference, I've created a conflict. So
Right.
part of what we try to do, and this is part of the value of that. So if I know this ahead of time, I can prescribe a process that might enable us to problem solve better, as well as give recognition and attention to the fact that all four of these functions are important, they're legitimate, and they need to be considered.
Mhm.
So if you go to the next slide, that's where we advocate what we call the Z model for problem solving.
Okay.
So with the use of the Z model, and this is a tool that I could use as a facilitator or as a meeting leader or even as a meeting member, I might suggest that we start with sensing. What are the details that we know about the problem we're trying to solve? And then I would go from there. Notice the arrows. I go from sensing to intuiting. What is the big picture that starts to emerge as I consider the details? And then I might go to what is the logical conclusion, or what are logical conclusions that might help to address or solve the problem. And then I might also at that same stage say, using that same analysis, which conclusion or which option might work most effectively in solving the problem.
And that last one is when you're finally sort of taking into consideration everything else that's going on.
Right.
Feelings, what other people, what people.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and at the feeling stage, I might say, how does the decision sit with me? How might it sit with others? How do we communicate this? Because communication comes out of that feeling orientation. Feeling types tend to have an orientation toward how do people need to hear this in such a way that they can accept it and it doesn't cause them great amounts of heartburn. So basically what I've done by using all four functions is I've covered the four major aspects of just about any problem I'll ever need to solve.
This is super cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now the next slide, when I do this with teams, I may have them plot where they believe their team is in terms of extroversion and introversion. So that's where this slide comes in handy. Are we heavily extroverted, heavily introverted? Do we have a good mixture? One of the things that I discovered when I did this with one client group was it was a highly extroverted organization. And so extroverts ruled just about everything, and introverts were pretty invisible. And because extroverts were the team leaders, the captains of everything, things proceeded at the pace that worked for extroverts, and introverts were kind of dragged along, literally dragged along, with no regard for pacing or timing or allowing them time to process or, address concerns that they might have. So I will ask teams to plot where you believe your team is, or I would even give them copies of the assessment that you just gave, because this becomes a very good tool for them to look at how do you make your team more effective. So if you're highly extroverted, there's so much you can do with this chart. One of the things I've done with this chart is ask people to plot that and then ask, what are the things that we will do well as a team, and what are the areas that may be problematic for us? So, for instance, when I've been in HR, there are typically a ton of intuitive types in HR, which means that we oftentimes miss the sensing point. So, a lot of the details are missed. So, in terms of team building and making this team as strong as it could be, one of the questions we might ask ourselves is, what do we need to do to make sure that our attention to detail isn't overlooked. Because inevitably, the beauty of a strength is it determines what we can do well. But it also determines, or it also can guide us to where we might encounter flat sides. So if I'm overwhelmingly intuitive, which I am, then one of the challenges for me is always paying attention to the details. The details will bite me in the butt every time. And if I'm extremely extroverted, which I am, then that says that one of the things that I like is the fact that I do things very, very quickly, which I do. But the problem with doing things very quickly is sometimes I forget stuff. That in my effort to get things done, to push it out the door, I miss important details. Or I may not think as deeply about some things as I could. I come to a conclusion very quickly without allowing other points of view to weigh in.
Okay.
So this tool can be used in that regard. It could be a homework assignment, or if you have people in your training that are, supervisors from the same organization, it would be a good exercise to break them up and have them do some work around that.
Okay.
And then the next two slides are just getting them to think about in what ways can you expand your genius. One of the things that I encourage people to do is recognize that the type table, which they spend some time on, is a very useful tool. So if they were to do a type table of their team, then it would show them where the various areas of genius are. Who's really great with details? Who's really great with big picture stuff? Who's a really good pace person in terms of the extroversion, really keep things going, move it along? And who can help us slow down when we need to slow down and look at some of the particulars of the work that we're doing to make sure we've gotten everything covered that needs to be covered? Who manages the detail? Who's got the big picture? Who can help us with the logic? Who can make sure that people are not forgotten in the process? Who can help us generate ideas? The thing that P's do very well is they keep the process open. So P's have no great need for closure, which is useful sometimes if you have a tendency to come to a conclusion too quickly and miss important details. Yet on the other hand, you need J's because the flat sides of a P is that P's will spend forever looking at stuff. I'll take forever looking at a car and never drive one off the lot. So I need someone to help me, narrow in, focus, select which one I want. Patricia and I both being P's, it's hilarious when we get together, and I find myself doing this with her a lot, where I will say, we'll be going out and she'll be looking at, do you like this dress or that dress? I said, well, I like them both. And she'll say, well, I like them both. I said, well, right now you can't afford to buy both. Pick one.
Right.
And she hates that. She absolutely hates it. She'll say, well, why don't you pick it? I'm not wearing it. You pick it.
Right.
And so it is that kind of a thing where sometimes, even if we're a bunch of P's together, we still have to come to conclusion, and that conclusion may, be forced by time. It may be forced by money. We got $1,000 to spend before the end of the fiscal year. Where are we going to spend it? We can't take forever deciding. We just have to figure something out and spend the money. So sometimes we need, all the times, we need the opposite sides of us to help us create a level of effectiveness. So that's the kind of thing that I'd want them to think about and to play around with. Who are the people in your world that can help you be more effective? Where is your team currently? Are you heavily weighted toward one particular personality type to the exclusion of others? A lot of times, one of the things that I discovered when I did my doctoral research is we tend to hire after our own kind. So I tend to like people who are like me. And so in the process of hiring, I may inevitably and unavoidably get a bunch of people that are just like me. And I only multiply my ineffectiveness. Now I multiply
Right.
my effectiveness as well, but I multiply my ineffectiveness unless I'm aware of that and do things consciously to make sure that we're addressing those areas where we collectively have flat sides.
I love the way you describe it as the areas in which we have flat sides. That's a nice way to describe that.
Yeah, I don't like to describe it as a weakness because it's really not a weakness. It's just an undeveloped side of myself. It's, I just haven't spent any time developing. Now, I could, so it would be less. In fact, a lot of people say, should I spend more time on my strengths or my weaknesses? And I tend to be one who advocates going with your strengths for the reasons that we saw in that first handedness exercise. It's more fun, it's easier, it's quicker, I'm more skillful at it. But the other side of that is I do have to think about how I'm going to manage the sides that are not my strengths. So I need to have people around me. I currently have an assistant she's a genius with details. And it's like, thank you, God. I don't know. I would be in a world of hurt if I had somebody just like me who was my assistant. We'd be equally lost. We'd have a great time because we'd understand each other really well. But in terms of getting things done, in terms of meeting deadlines, getting things out the door, making certain things are happening, that would really be a challenge for us.
I'm just happy for you that you have an assistant.
You and me
because
both.
Because you didn't have one here.
No. And that just it's a challenge. I mean, I can do it. I've done it in the past, having worked for myself. But it's by far not a preference. And it's I am not a gifted detail person, as my desk demonstrates over and over again. So I think the question that would be worthwhile for them to consider after this is, how can you use this information to better lead and manage the people who work with you? And that's an open-ended question that they probably could think on for the rest of their lives. But for the purpose of this activity, you may want them to just think on that for a few minutes and then publicly share some ideas that they may have come up with.
Okay. Cool. Excellent.